from historical landmarks...
Now for the piece de resistance, the original torch.
Wow. ...to hidden treasures.
Somebody has to preserve a record of what we have. It's worth it.
Lasting legacies.
I think it's what we needed to do to create a real movement, to create real equality.
And a record-breaking show.
You're standing in the wings and the orchestra starts, something just takes over. I guess it's theatre magic.
New York is without a doubt one of the most dynamic, diverse and creative cities in the world, and one that I've loved going back to time and time again. Over the years here on The Travel Show, we've brought you a ton of great stories from the Big Apple, and in this week's show, we'll be looking back at some of them. The city has always been at the forefront of activism, so let's kick off by remembering how the events that happened here on one balmy night way back in June 1969 inspired change.
In the US, the 1960s was an era of activism and protests.
It was the end of the counterculture 1960s. Women were fighting for their rights, blacks were fighting for their rights, Latinos were fighting for their rights. And we just said, what about us? Why not us? Why not me?
On June 28, 1969, the riots at the Stonewall Inn on Christopher Street would mark the birth of the modern gay rights movement.
So this is where it's at.
Yes.
This is where it all happened.
Mark Segal was 18 at the time and had arrived in the city just a few weeks earlier.
You're seeing all the rainbow flags on it.
What is it like to be back here?
It's sort of emotional. I think of the people who helped educate me or what we needed to do to create a real movement, to create real equality.
What was it like that night?
Just like any other normal night. We were inside, we were having a great time. I was standing in the back near the dance floor. The lights flickered on. Then they came on full force. I looked over at someone and said, what's happening? And they said, oh, very casually, it's a raid. I'd never been in a raid before, so I was a little nervous. Police barged in. I just started pushing people around. And anybody looked like they were successful, they went up to them and said, take out your wallet. And they took the money. It was, out graft right in front of everybody's face, and they didn't care, because that's the way you got to treat gay men and lesbian women in those days. You treated them like trash. So they carted me, I went out, and I stood about right over there. Out here, somewhere between 50 and 100. Police tried to disperse us. We wouldn't disperse. It was the first time that gay people said to police, no, this is our neighborhood. You're not going to tell us to get off our street. We picked up stones, we picked up cans, and threw them. And that was the first night.
The protests raged for several nights and led to the first Pride March in 1970. The Stonewall Inn has since become a historic landmark and attracts visitors from across the globe keen to learn about the struggles.
It's illegal to serve gay people alcohol, and it was also...
I mean, it wasn't easy. Many of us went to jail. Many of us were beat. It's been a long 50 years, but guess what? We're further along than I would have ever expected.
I can't really imagine what it must have been like to be there on that day when the Stonewall riots were kicking off. But I loved what he said about the fact that for them, it was just a protest. They were just sticking up for their rights and doing what they felt they needed to do. And it's only now that we realize what big impact they all made.
Many cultural institutions have embraced the opportunity to delve deeper into LGBT history and culture, highlighting the bravery of some of the less well-known figures.
Some of the most important people are transgender people, and particularly Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson. A lot of people think of them just in terms of their participation in Stonewall, but they were really major activists at that time and were on the front lines of all of the demonstrations.
So the whole community came together then?
Yeah, both this new generation of activists and also the older generation of activists, and lesbian activists, gay activists, and transgender activists.
Oh yes, lesbians unite, yeah.
And so here you see thousands of people who are willing to come out of the closet and be part of this political movement.
It's hoped that exhibitions like this will help keep the memory of what happened alive and inspire future generations.
I'm 27. This is the first time I'm seeing many of these pieces. Why should people my age and my generation care about this exhibition?
In this internet age of people liking things on Facebook and a kind of internet activism, I think it's very hard for people to realize the real oppression that people faced in the 1960s and 70s, and also that they were able to make a difference. And the way they changed our society was by getting personally involved in politics, in joining organizations, creating newsletters, and putting their bodies on the line in demonstrations. I think we need to appreciate today and also be inspired by today to know that we can make a difference again.
And back at Stonewall, a chance encounter with a group of students provides an emotional reminder of just how far the movement has come.
I'm proud of what happened there. It makes me proud to see you all here today because it says the work that we did is filtering through. I think any of us who were there that night would have never expected would have come as far as we have. I'm shocked. I never thought I'd be able to be married. I never thought I'd be able to express that publicly. Me saying that I have a husband. Sorry, I'm getting emotional. Something maybe out here I never thought I could do. Wow. Yeah. So, thank you guys.
An emotional journey there for Ben Hunt back in 2019. From an iconic moment to an iconic monument, Lady Liberty on Ellis Island was for a long time the very first site of America for millions of immigrants. Originally a gift from the people of France in 2019, a brand new museum in her honour opened. I jumped on the early ferry to Liberty Island to be among the first to check it out just before it opens to the public. Wow, I've never seen the statue this close before. Definitely worth the ungodly wake-up call. The museum takes people all the way back to the statue's creation. It was designed by Frederick Auguste Bartholdi, who built it in his Paris workshop. The statue marked 100 years since the Declaration of Independence and the historic alliance between America and France. In 1885, it was shipped in 350 individual pieces over to New York, where it was reassembled and unveiled to the American public the next year.
So let's have a look at the face.
That's a huge face. This full-size replica is made from the same materials as the statue.
The important thing is for you to feel the narrowness of the copper. That's the full size of the copper.
I was not expecting it to be that thin.
No, I know, no one does. It's very thin. About the size of, yeah. Now for the piece de resistance, the original torch.
The torch.
The original torch.
Wow.
Stood up there from 1886 to 1984.
The original torch had been changed from Bartholdi's design to include a glass panel flame that could be lit up at night. In the 1980s, it was removed and replaced during a massive restoration of the statue. Talk to me about how difficult it was to get the torch in here.
Well, I didn't have to do it, but it was quite a task.
Yeah.
People worked for about 2 weeks from 3 in the afternoon till 3 at night, and they had this carrier that they laid the face on its back and then put the torch on it. We had not put in all the glass here so that it could lift quite nicely into its position.
Yeah.
And it all worked quite well, and here it is.
Martin and his team have been in charge of conserving the torch and cleaning it up.
It's just a simple cotton cloth, just trying to get the heavy things out.
Just getting rid of that dirt. Like with any cleaning job, it's never done. I do feel very honoured.
Yeah, it's
and
pretty
to be
cool.
able to touch it, because the public aren't going to be able to touch this, are they?
No, they're really not. Yeah, not really. Just don't leave any real marks, okay?
My hands are clean.
Go.
It's so iconic, and you think about its history and how it stood for freedom and for liberty to people all over the world. It really is a remarkable piece of work.
Still to come in this look back at stories from the Big Apple. How one artist has devoted his life's work to the New York subway. And the end of a truly historical run.
There's nothing not to love about it. It's all challenging and it's all wonderful, and I'm just so lucky to be able to work on it.
Now we're heading underground to meet an amazing guy who's dedicated his life to sketching every station of the New York subway. He started way back in 1978, and when we caught up with him in 2018, he was still going with his sketchbook in hand.
When I began my study, a voice inside my head said, you know, why don't you see how conscious people are of the subway art after all? I'd say, are you aware of the art in the subway? Well, half of them said, what art? Nothing, no idea at all. I got some pens here, red, green, and blue. Here we go. My study of the subway really began years ago when I was 8 years old. My father told me that down in the subway station in New York, there were pictures on the walls. I thought that was very curious. But what got me going deeper, besides the fact that I realized some stations were losing their decor, so they had to be recorded, and realizing this, I got concerned and thought, well, somebody has to preserve a record of what we have now. It became sort of a cause for me to record the embellishments of the stations. So we rather snowballed into a rather long project, which is now 40 years in the making and not done yet. Well, actually, the earliest stations were built 1900, 1904, and at that time was a great movement called the City Beautiful Movement, when the mayor and his council decided that they wanted to establish New York as noble and attractive a city as the old European capitals are, which the Americans and New Yorkers had always looked up to. And the mayor decided, well, you know what, we can do that right here in New York also. A good example of the very high design elements in the subway stations we found at Borough Hall in Brooklyn, the first subway station and then the first subway line into Brooklyn. It's just like one of the dozen designs that Lafarge created just for this station alone. But it's worth it. So what I do when I do my project, I have to do it at night, on weekends. Often you'll find me at the library or on the subway drawing pictures of what's on the wall and taking notes on how many mosaics are there, what color are they, the general description of any station. I've been self-publishing my work ever since I began. This year, though, a lot has changed. A university has published a book of my drawings. My drawings and my notebooks, the real thing, the originals, have been on display in Grand Central Terminal. That's what it's for. That's what people
made us stop and appreciate. Look at 137th Street. Look at that. We don't do that anymore.
No, we don't. No.
We don't have time to look at it, and we don't have the money to produce it.
Since I've started this study, being, I hope, somewhat of a thorough person, I intend to finish it, which means I really have to visit all the stations in the system. I have quite a long road ahead of me. I've done 110 stations so far, and I have many more to go, obviously 360 more or more, God knows. Because I've started, I feel I have to finish it.
And just to update you, we've had word that Philip is still sketching away on the subway. So let's hope he eventually reaches his goal. Well, just before we go, we've got time to go behind the final curtain of The Phantom of the Opera. After 35 years on Broadway, this record-breaking show came to an end in April this year. So before the cast took their final bow, we went behind the scenes to meet some of them. And while it's goodbye from them, we'll see you again next week.
I still cry every time I see it. I'm a softie, what can I tell you?
It has permeated every aspect of pop culture. And I think there's very few musicals that can do that.
It has been a part of my life for almost half of my adult life.
Somehow I thought that the show would be running when I was gone.
It's hard to put into words because I love what I do. Makes me a bit teary.
This is our working warehouse, and we're in New York. I'm not going to tell you exactly where, but we're in New York City, and this is where we keep all the spare costumes that we need to do fittings and stuff. I've been with the show since 1989. We did a count about 4 or 5 years ago, I think, and at that point we determined there were like 7,000 individual costume pieces here. So there's a lot. A lot. And we didn't even count the hats and shoes. This is meant to set the stage for everything that you're about to see for the next 2 hours and 20 minutes. It's sort of like this is the level of decor and texture.
This is like a cage. So I have a lot of steel going around here. But it makes me very upright, which is great. There's definitely something that happens to you as a performer, you know, no matter what happens in the day. And once you start that process of getting dressed and putting your makeup on, and then you're standing in the wings and the orchestra starts, something just takes over and it all falls into place. I guess it's theatre magic.
I was actually just finishing another show, and I hadn't seen my daughter in a while, and then I got this audition from my agents, and I said, no, I don't want to do that. He stopped, and he turned around in his chair, and he said, Ben, if you don't do that audition, you will regret it for the rest of your life. And I figured a good way of getting out some emotions was to like tell my daughter how important it would be if I were to get the job. And I like kind of got the panic attack out of my system, and literally my phone rang and it was my agent telling me I had gotten it. And it's a frustrating thing because the costs have risen since the post-pandemic world. So the show closing is very bittersweet.
Welcome to the real Phantom Slayer.
It felt like my years of studying and practice had paid off. This is the first show I ever saw on Broadway, and it is my Broadway debut, so it's a beautiful, beautiful full circle moment for me. It meant that for other people and for other, young Black girls who would come to see me or would see my face and see me playing this role, it meant that they could have a chance and they could see themselves playing a role like this too, and kind of affirming their hopes and dreams in a way that I didn't necessarily have growing up.
When the Phantom first came to Broadway, it actually revolutionized the business, That was a spectacle that was never seen before. The whole package, I mean, the costumes, the music, the everything, it just comes together in a package that, to me, is very hard to duplicate. Phantom happens to be my favorite show of all times. And I've seen the show probably 9 times. I plan to see it one more time before it closes.
That's where I'm falling on those notes.
We've been through a lot with this chandelier over the years, but it's held up. All the circuitry is intact. We've never burned out one piece of wire. I hope she gets a place in a museum someday.
Welcome to the Phantom. Keep moving. I'm working in this theater for 38 years. I started before the Phantom. I feel proud because working, meeting thousands of people every week in this theater from around the world. People know me sometimes by name.
Coming closer now to these final performances, I feel an enormous amount of gratitude, and I feel honored.
There's nothing not to love about it. It's all challenging and it's all wonderful, and I'm just so lucky to be able to work on it.
I do feel like Broadway's losing part of its foundation with the show closing.
Pride is an understatement as to what I would feel. This show is much bigger than the rest of us. And it has been a wonderful, wonderful ride indeed.